We have Chris Herbst here today, Associate Professor of Public Affairs. He's an economist at Arizona State University. He's a well-known labor economist who's done a lot of work in the area of the economics of childcare and the impact of welfare reform policies on child well-being. Today, Chris is going to present his joint work with Erdal Tekin and James Gordon on experimental evidence on the demand for childcare quality. So thanks so much for coming.
Thank you. So hi everyone, thanks for the introduction, Joe, and for the invitation to be here with you today, and thanks everyone for coming and for great conversations. And it seems like you are building something exciting here. It seems like there's a lot of energy, so keep up the good work. Congrats and keep up the good work. Okay, so as the title of my paper suggests, what we and by the way, I want to say that the work is extremely preliminary. So preliminary, in fact, I refer to it as in this paper we don't have a paper. In fact, it's so preliminary. So your comments and questions obviously would be valuable to us. So what we do in this work is study parents' demand for both the quality and non-quality features of childcare within the home-based childcare market. So what we're trying to sort of understand are parents' preferences for various attributes, various dimensions of childcare, trying to get at questions around to what extent do parents value quality versus convenience when they are making their consumption decisions. And we try to get to this question of parents' willingness to pay for higher quality childcare. And so to get at these questions, we conduct a field experiment. And the setting for that field experiment is a large online job service that connects parents looking for childcare with individual caregivers looking to be employed as providers within the home. Within this market, we create a number of fictitious caregiver profiles, randomly assign a bunch of characteristics to those profiles, and then use them to apply for real parent job postings on the website. And so our outcome of interest is whether or not a given profile with all of its randomly assigned characteristics receives a positive parent response, which is basically a job offer or a job interview. We conducted data collection for this experiment between March 2017 and May 2018. We applied for 8,000 jobs in total across 8 US cities. And we really focused our job search not on one-off babysitter positions, but rather we were just in kind of longer-term care arrangements within the household, ongoing part and full-time jobs.
We can sort of chat more about it later during sort of your research design. And we talked a little earlier about IRB sort of requirements. What will you talk about a little, given that these were fictitious applications, sort of what those who are responding are told, at some point if they're trying to follow up to get these services that aren't real?
Yeah, so for parents that respond to us, they get a message back quickly that we're no longer considering them. We've accepted. We're no longer looking for work, but we've accepted work elsewhere. Yeah.
Then that satisfied sort of IRB kind of requirements about doing no harm.
Right. This sort of got us by the non-informed consent. Yeah. So as I mentioned, we assigned some quality and non-quality or convenience attributes to the profiles. So the primary quality attributes, the caregiver's education and work experience, and then the convenience or non-quality characteristics, we signal whether or not the caregiver is a car owner and their degree of availability to provide child care throughout the week. And obviously,
I think to some degree it's a misnomer to call car ownership a non-quality element because if you live in a really bad neighborhood, you don't want your child to be walking around from school and possibly be shot at. So it might actually be essential for the quality of the child care that the caregiver has a car.
Yeah, and it's even more complicated than that, I think, because to the extent that car ownership is correlated with income, and income is correlated with the quality of care, I mean, we really could be proxying quality. Fair point.
Yeah, so I would use a different term than quality, non-quality, because
Yeah, okay. We also take advantage of this sort of interesting piece of information on the website where caregivers are allowed to reveal to parents their hourly wage expectation, which we sort of interpret as the hourly price of childcare. And so we randomize on that piece of information as well. And so obviously the goal with all these characteristics is to sort of elicit parent preferences for these characteristics. Because we do random assignment, we can generate causal estimates on the things that matter to parents' decision making. So I told you a little bit about what we do and how we do it. Let me sort of spend now some time making a case for why what we do is important from a public policy perspective. And our story really starts with the rather woeful state of childcare quality in the U.S. So measured quality is generally low to mediocre at best. For example, a study by the National Institute for Child Health and Development finds that 42% of childcare settings nationwide are rated to be poor to fair at best, and that only 12% of kids receive what's called positive caregiving. That's highly interactional childcare, emotionally stimulating, sensitive caregiving. And as you might imagine, quality is often worse for economically disadvantaged kids. And concerns over quality extend even to state-run pre-kindergarten programs, which are often thought to be among the very best early care and education programs on offer in the United States.
Can you talk a little bit more, so I remember Blau's work on sort of measures of childcare quality, about some of the most common sort of measures of quality that have been used in this literature and how sort of comparable they are across?
Yeah, so when a provider is rated to be poor, what that means is that it's poor on basically two dimensions of quality, what's called process quality, which is really about the way in which caregivers interact, how intellectually stimulating the interactions are, how emotionally warm the interactions are between the kid and the caregiver. The other dimension of quality relates to structural quality. So these are kind of whereas process quality is dynamic, structural quality is sort of static in the sense that, I mean, it's based on things like caregivers' level of education, things that sort of don't change, whether or not they use an education curriculum. Those are measures of structural quality.
On the dimension of intellectual sort of interaction in that first measure, so how worried are people that that's in part capturing the quality of the kids that are at the child care center?
It's a huge, it's a huge concern because a major sort of component of process quality are these interactions, the extent to which there is like a call and response interaction between the kid and the caregiver. So the kid's got to be up to it as well in order to sort of benefit from it.
Somewhere in your slides, I'm missing the information of what percentage of all children are in childcare centers for certain age groups, and what percentage have parents who are looking for these childcare providers. So that doesn't seem to be. Eventually, you're gonna need to include that in the paper.
Yeah, true. So 60% of U.S. preschoolers are in some form of childcare arrangement, non-parental childcare. That includes home-based and center-based. 60%, and they're in this care for about 35 hours a week. Is there another question?
No, that was...
Oh. Okay. So, quality matters, and yet, actually, why? Why care about quality? Okay. Well, for two reasons. I mean, number one, we have pretty good evidence that relative to high-income kids, low-income kids start school, start kindergarten, already significantly behind their high-income counterparts. There's already a large academic achievement gap that exists. However, when low-income kids attend very high-quality early education programs, that gap can be mitigated substantially, or in some cases, entirely eliminated. So sort of the best available contemporary evidence from some of these local pre-kindergarten programs suggests that 1 to 2 years of enrollment for low-income kids can almost reduce the academic achievement gap by about half. Okay, so quality clearly matters. Yeah.
Is there anything in the literature that gets at maybe kind of the selection between, care that's done within the family as opposed to going to a child care provider? Are there differences across those?
Yeah, there's a huge literature in sort of developmental psychology that tries to understand like which, basically the sort of estimating like a first stage regression. Generally it's sort of more advantaged kids go into center care. Lower income kids and children from racial and ethnic minorities go into are more likely to attend home-based care. That's certainly a lot of very wealthy kids employ highly educated caregivers to provide care in the home. But that's sort of the general pattern. Okay, so quality matters, yet it is so often of low. It is quite low. So the question is why, and this is sort of relevant to the question that we take up in this paper. So there seems to be sort of a coalescence of agreement around the possibility that parents are either ill-informed about how to identify what high-quality care looks like, or they may place relatively little value on quality and relatively more value on the convenience features of childcare. So that the simple kind of theoretical story is as follows: that parents may not be able to distinguish between low and high quality childcare, in part because, or in large part because childcare is a complex product to evaluate, and quality in particular is complicated and multidimensional and difficult, if not impossible, to identify directly, to observe directly by parents. So childcare is often referred to as an experience good, that is a good whose key quality features you can't fully observe or understand prior to consuming it. So childcare is likely a product that you don't know that much about prior to consuming it. You have to consume it for a while to really understand it. And so when parents can't make informed decisions, what ends up happening is they overconsume low-quality care, they underconsume high-quality childcare, and when the demand side is sort of behaving in that way, providers don't have much of an incentive to produce high-quality care, especially when producing it is more costly. And so what ends up happening is you're left with a market with lots of low to mediocre problems. So this really is just a simple story around information asymmetry, which has sort of led some to refer to the childcare market as a lemons market. So that's the theoretical story. Is there any evidence, and this bears very much on our paper, is there any evidence to suggest that that's the case?
Sorry,
Yeah.
but back to that. So what have been sort of the market-based responses to try to deal with that? What are the equivalents of warranties or ways to sort of try to signal credibly sort of quality?
Yeah, well, one is regulations. So regulating not regulating quality, but regulating the inputs to the production of quality. And also, and I'll return to this at the end of the talk, states are now moving to enact things called quality rating and improvement systems. Basically star ratings for childcare and into those ratings go lots and lots of things that supposedly measure quality. Yeah.
Now, your data for that it's common to make a decision in one day, 41% do that, is based on an article published in 2007, so their data must be at least 15 years old. And it seems that during that period, there's been a big increase in how much parents take care of their children themselves. Time use surveys show that. So it could very well be that if a similar survey was done today to see for the people, your data are from 2017 and 2018, it could very well be that the parents who are currently looking for help might be spending more time than they would have 15 years ago.
Yeah. Yeah, it's possible. I mean, with the tightness of the labor market, I don't know. I mean, maybe parents want to get in even quicker.
Maybe.
I don't know. I mean,
It's certainly
yeah,
something to qualify.
yeah. True. Okay, so is there any evidence to suggest that there are information problems in the market, and are there, if there are information problems, are they likely having implications for quality? What I want to do is sort of summarize kind of three distinct streams of childcare literature that sort of bear on the potential for there to be information problems. So number one is the way in which families conduct the childcare search. So number one, we know that childcare search is a shortened duration. Many families make their decision within one day. Number two, family members and friends are the primary sources of information about childcare options. So basically what we have is a situation where equally ill-informed parties are exchanging information about childcare options. And then finally...
Excuse me.
Yeah.
Sorry for interrupting. But you might want to distinguish between intensive and extensive search. So extensive search would involve asking a lot of people and spending more time. But intensive search would involve that you want to really know how these friends or family members, how the daycare went, and you might already know a lot of information at the intensive level about what's happening with their children, and you might say, that you might have searched over a long period of time by just consulting people you know well and you've seen their kids grow.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah.
So for the papers that talk about searches being short, does it distinguish between like income levels of the parents looking for? Because like I would expect on lower income level, they're going to have to make a decision faster than someone on the higher income level.
Yeah, but what's striking about that duration finding is that it's pretty similar across low income and high income families. As it turns out, there are some differences, but at least with regard to the search, they look more similar than not. Yeah.
Are there any patterns based on the age of the child?
I could find out. There may be sort of differences in search duration by the age of the child.
I'm not even sure which way to go. Like an infant, you'd probably be searching more concerned. Yeah.
Yeah.
Or you've grown to know how to search by the time your child gets
Right.
Right, and also if your child is kind of getting closer to school age, maybe you'd be more concerned about having a more educated provider.
Right.
Or not actually sure.
Yeah, so this is those numbers are sort of lumping children ages 0 to 4 together. Yeah. And then finally, parents are less likely to inquire about the quality characteristics when they visit a child care provider and more likely to inquire about the convenience and logistical aspects of childcare. It's actually striking that just 4% of parents ask about childcare centers' turnover rates. Okay, much more likely to ask about the logistics.
What do we know about those who, and this has to be relatively recent work, who are using online services to potentially solicit childcare versus those that don't? Do we have some notion of the selection of parents who are using particular sources?
Not much. I mean, I think that our sort of estimates will inform. That's actually an interesting point to maybe sort of compare, do some comparison across sectors. But yeah. Okay, the second line of work comes from parent preferences. Studies of parent preferences. In other words, what characteristics of childcare do parents value when they make a decision? I'm going to sort of levy some criticism of this work later on, but suffice it to say for now, essentially what these studies do is basically there's surveys of parents about which things matter and which things don't matter when they make their decision. And not surprisingly, when you ask the question that way, everything matters. So parents overwhelmingly claim to value quality. They want a program with a curriculum. They want highly trained teachers, a safe environment, emotionally warm, and so forth. But parents also want convenient childcare. They want childcare that's close to home, whose opening and closing hours align with their work schedules, and of course, affordability is a major is of huge importance. Okay, the final line of work deals with parents' satisfaction with their childcare provider. What are the determinants of parents' satisfaction with their provider? And to what extent are parents accurate assessors of childcare quality? So number one, from this line of work, we know that parents just may not be very demanding consumers. That is, parents are really optimistic about the quality of their kids' program. So for example, a recent NPR poll found that 88% of parents rated their program to be very good or excellent. Now, that ought to immediately raise a red flag for you, given what I told you a couple of minutes ago about the relatively low levels of quality in the market. And that sort of potential disconnect, I think, is brought into sharp focus by this sort of interesting line of work which directly evaluates to what extent can parents identify quality versus the assessments of trained observers. In other words, the assessments of developmental psychologists. So basically, parents and the observers go in, they evaluate the identical set of characteristics, and what this research finds over and over again is that parents overstate the quality of their kids' arrangement relative to trained observers.
Again, these are relatively old studies.
Yeah, I know. The findings, there's a 10-year span between, and there's really no changing in the results. This may change in a world with QRIS, but I understand. Yeah. Finally, there's a line of work that looks at the characteristics of childcare that predict parent satisfaction. And what this work tends to find is that various measures of quality don't predict how happy parents are with their childcare provider. What does? Convenience. How close the care is, its opening and closing hours, and so forth. Okay. So my sort of read of those streams of literature I think suggests that there are information problems in the market, that parents tend to undervalue quality relative to convenience. But so I think before we close the book on the literature and proclaim it to be the case, I think there are some flaws with prior work that I think motivate our contributions. Okay? So number one, this is a pitch to stop doing health policy research and start doing childcare work. Almost everything that I just told you is based on basically descriptive work. And what I mean by that is that these studies apply what I call a check-all-that-apply approach to measuring preferences. Basically, researchers put in front of parents a long laundry list of childcare characteristics, and they have parents sort of check off the things that matter to them. And when you sort of use that methodological approach, what I become concerned of is that parents are not referencing their true preferences, but rather the sort of socially desirable preferences. Secondly, this work does what I call, it examines ex post preferences. That is, it asks parents what matters to them about childcare after they've made the childcare decision. So it's possible that the search itself and the program that the kid is in is informing what they value and not the other way around. Okay? Finally, and probably most importantly, when you use a check-all-that-apply approach, you don't force parents to have to make trade-offs, which is obviously a hallmark of decision-making in the real world. There's no sense of whether parents value, you can't get a sense of whether parents value convenience over quality. In other words, you're not observing a measure of behavior in these studies. So, what we do in this work, I argue, is provide some of the very first credible evidence on preferences for childcare. That is, by randomly assigning characteristics, we can experimentally induce demand, And by way of our interactions with parents, that is parents telling us what they like and what they don't like, we've got to measure behavior. We can see parents sort of voting with their feet. Okay? Number one. Number two, almost everything that I just summarized for you comes from studies of the center-based childcare market. That's a large, important market, but it ignores entirely another large and important market, the home-based market, which is obviously the focus of our work. We argue that definitional issues around trying to sort of define who is a home-based childcare worker, because the market is very fluid, movement into and out of the market is very simple, that it makes sort of defining who is a childcare provider difficult, and therefore difficult to do data collection. We essentially mitigate that problem by relying on, I mean, number one, a very large market comprised of about 10 million caregivers and 13 million families that operates online. So that means it's highly organized and closed. So defining sort of who are participants and who are not is a lot easier. Okay, and given that, quite aside from sort of studying the home-based market, studying this online market is interesting of itself, just because of the number of people involved in it. Okay. So again, home-based market, and we observe and measure behavior. Those are our sort of two key contributions. So with that background in mind, what I'm going to do for the rest of the talk is, you're all health policy folks. I'm going to assume you know nothing about the childcare market. So I'm going to give you a crash course on how the home-based market is organized and what these workers look like relative to childcare teachers in other markets. And then with that background behind us, I'll take you through the experimental design results and then conclude with a discussion of policy implications. Okay, so for our purposes, I think it's useful to think about childcare teachers as operating in one of two settings: center-based settings or home-based settings. So center-based settings tend to be heavily regulated. Their programs operate out of their own building or in a building that is sort of shared with another closely related organization. These programs can be for-profit or not-profit, public or private. Okay? That's not what so you should think about programs like KinderCare, Montessori preschool, Primrose programs as being center-based programs. Okay, that's not what we're studying. We are studying instead the home-based market. This market is lightly or unregulated entirely, and the care either occurs in the home of the provider or in the home of the child in question. And it's useful to sort of think about there being three subsectors within the home-based market. There's the licensed market, which basically are folks running daycare businesses out of their homes, caring for small numbers of kids at the same time. And then two classes of unlicensed care, licensed paid and unpaid. And we are studying, our focus is the licensed paid market. As you can see, it's large, about 1 million workers, caring for about 2.5 million preschool-age kids over the course of any given week. Yeah.
How did you get the number of unpaid, unlicensed workers? What statistics are available for that?
Yeah, well, I guess I should have cited it. So this is from the National Survey of Early Care and Education, done in 2012. And basically, they conducted surveys of home-based providers running businesses out of their home, as well as a nationally representative survey of individuals, basically looking for individuals who work as childcare providers in the service of a household.
But if they are unpaid, there must be relatives?
Yeah, certainly the unpaid, well, this is where sort of definitional issues get a little squishy. A relative one week could be unlicensed paid, and then the next week unlicensed unpaid. So there's some permeability here in the definitions. But I think it's useful to think about unlicensed paid workers as being friends, relatives, and neighbors of the family in question. But they can also be nannies and babysitters, and obviously for us, folks that are found and hired on these childcare job websites. But most of everything that I just said also applies to unpaid folks as well. Okay. The folks that we study are freelancers. They're not business owners. They care. The kinds of childcare that we study occur exclusively in the child's home. This childcare is regularly scheduled. It takes place for a large number of hours each week, not surprisingly, given that parents are hiring these providers so that they can go to work. And although, I mean, it's not surprising that there's generally a pre-existing relationship between the caregiver and the kid, in our case, because the care is found online, there is no relationship that predates the caregiving relationship. So who are these folks? Who are these unlicensed paid home providers that we study, and what do they look like relative to center-based teachers and these licensed home small business owners? Well, I think what is clear is that these folks are less skilled, they're younger, they're less experienced, they're less likely to be undertaking sort of various forms of childcare, human capital investment. Although they work long hours each week in their childcare job, it's also quite likely for these folks to have employment, non-childcare employment as a secondary job. What that suggests to me, along with the low levels of human capital investment, is that these folks generally don't see the childcare they're providing as being part of like a long-term career trajectory in early care and education. These folks are themselves fairly disadvantaged. They are in households that are of low income, and not surprisingly, given the work that they do, they don't get employment perks. So rates of non-insurance are high among this group. Okay, so low-skilled, young, disadvantaged themselves, I think in absolute terms and relatively speaking. Yeah.
So speaking of this, do you know the families who are using this online website to looking for those kind of child caregivers? Because those families may be different from the regular family. They may be looking for a child caregiver who got paid lower than a regular child caregiver or than a center-based childcare.
Yes, I mean yes. So given these characteristics, I mean, I think it's reasonable to ask whether I mean, number one, that's known to families, and whether that sort of is influencing what kind of market they're participating in. I mean, I don't have a good sense. We couldn't collect a lot of information on the families. There just isn't a lot of information available. We have a proxy so parents can signal how much they're willing to pay their childcare provider, which may be sort of a measure of willingness or ability to pay. I actually think it's more aligned with the family's income level. So we do have that piece of information. As it turns out, that actually generates some interesting results.
Do you know the location the family requested? You probably know the neighborhoods and demographics for the families.
Yeah, we have the town.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that would enable us to get some leverage on local. Yeah. Yeah. Okay, everyone okay with the background? There's your crash course. So, on to the experimental design, which is the fun stuff. So, as I mentioned before, we are playing in this online, large, vibrant online childcare market. In order to participate in the market, whether you're a parent or a caregiver, you have to create a profile. A lot of data, a lot of information required to create this. And in addition, if you're a parent, you have to obviously create a job posting to play in the market. We searched for these job postings in 8 large cities, and we applied these criteria when deciding whether to apply for a given position. So number one, we applied only to the most recently posted positions. Number two, as I said before, we stayed away from one-off babysitter jobs and stuck to long-term jobs. And we also applied for jobs where the family posted a profile photo only. That was fairly common, actually. And this was for the purposes of coding some basic demographic characteristics about the family. Yeah.
So I was thinking of California in particular about some of the regulations about having like unlicensed childcare center in your home, right? So when you look at these 8 cities, are there similar regulations in those, or are we worried that like maybe there's some selectivity based on city as to whether you would actually put yourself out there to be on the website and then maybe be tracked down for having an unlicensed facility?
It's a good question. I mean, missing from here are any number of plausible California cities.
Right.
And in fact, we couldn't run. We wanted to include LA and or San Francisco. We could run the experiment through the service in California because California has makes a number of additional requirements. In particular, in terms of getting like running background checks in order to participate as a caregiver, that we just couldn't do. So clearly, I mean, even though this is unregulated, I mean, we couldn't play in all areas. And to the extent that, I mean, we are capturing some tough regulation states like Pennsylvania, District of Columbia and Illinois, Georgia, Phoenix. Regulations are really quite non-existent, basically. So I think we are capturing some diversity in the regulatory environment, but we were really going for jobs. We wanted to make sure that there was a sufficient number of jobs to apply for. We have some geographic diversity and likely some demographic diversity.
So is there, what sort of liability does the online clearinghouse sort of take on for either any sort of injuries at the home by the caregiver or something that happens with the kid? Who's assuming what risk legally? Civilly?
I will look into that. We did not have to, so the profile undergoes a pretty rigorous review process by the company, but we did not have to sign waivers, we did not have to, liability waivers or otherwise, we did not have to undergo criminal background checks, fingerprint checks, first aid certifications, those sorts of things.
What are one-off babysitting jobs?
Oh, date night. We stayed away from date night.
Okay.
Yeah. Because we felt like if there was going to be some effect of education, experience some of these quality, that the signal would be sort of better interpreted by families who are looking for longer term caregiving arrangements rather than a couple of hours on a Saturday night, where the family's going out to the movies, basically. We thought that we put the quality characteristics to the best test, the fairest test in the context of these long-term caregiving arrangements.
Do you think there's much of like a heuristic effect or something like that of people going to this website assuming that there is some sort of, major quality assurance that comes along with being part of this website, which would then, cause them to not as much concern themselves with things other than convenience and price?
So this, as I was talking to people today, a version of this question came up. The whole point of this is to reduce search frictions, basically, right? The parents, for the caregiver as well, actually, right? I think the caregiver wants to know what they're getting into. The parents want to know what they're getting into, and I think if the parents can learn a little bit about the caregiver. And that care occurs in the home of the family, that the parents are sort of maybe more trusting of non-parental childcare, basically, than maybe the case in like a center-based arrangement. So yeah, I mean, I think the answer to the question is yes. I mean, that's our operating hypothesis. Yeah.
Are you able to tell anything about experience that the parents have with the website? Like how long they've been on the website or whether they've ever hired anyone before?
No. No. We know that information for the caregiver because families leave reviews of the caregiver. But we don't have that. So yeah, we don't know the extent to which. Although I guess we could sort of reverse engineer. Like if they left reviews, like we could backtrack it, but we don't have a sense of like how active the families have been. Yeah.
Do you know anything about their other children? Like if this is...
Well, we know the number and the ages of the kids.
Okay.
Yeah.
Even if they're not actually looking for a caregiver for those children, do you know like if they have older kids that they would have had to?
We know the total. We know the number of kids that would be cared for. The number and ages of the kids to be cared for.
Okay.
Yeah, that's what's revealed to the caregiver. Yeah. Third question.
Yeah, it's somewhat related. So like you said, the users or the caregivers on this website, they have ratings from previous jobs that they did or whatnot. So these profiles you create, they have no ratings, correct?
We, and I will talk about this in just a second, we actually created a fictitious parent rating, 5-star rating.
There you go.
To make the profiles look more, to make the profiles look more realistic and frankly, just to be more competitive.
No, yeah, I was just worried that you get, is this the effect on, first-time caregivers as opposed to, more experienced?
Yeah. Yeah.
Since you only took profiles with pictures, I wonder how much of what kind of biases that created.
I mean, really, it's a requirement on the books. Like that's part of our standard operating procedure. But like the overwhelming majority of families have photos, in addition to the caregivers. In fact, caregivers, you can now, and for families as well, post videos like family videos and caregiver videos. So it's just extremely common for families to post photos. Yeah. Okay. So we collected a variety of information about the family, the gender of the job poster, and the race and ethnicity of the job poster, as well as a variety of information about the childcare job itself, whether or not there was the family required full or part-time care, whether the family required the caregiver to have a car, and then we took advantage of this. I mentioned this before. This sort of interesting variable where the parents could sort of signal to caregivers the bottom and top dollar amount that they'd be willing to pay caregivers per hour, and so that actually generated some interesting results. Okay. So here's sort of an example. If you were a caregiver looking for jobs, what it essentially you do is you sort of punch in the search criteria here, and you get a bunch of job postings from families. What's interesting here is the top two would be examples of non-relevant jobs because they're short-term babysitter positions, and then the bottom two are longer-term nanny type arrangements. Okay, and so essentially what you do then is click on the link, and you're inside the parent profile. So you can see the profile photo, various characteristics about the job requirements, the number and ages of the kids to be cared for. So it said who you'll care for, other requirements, and then the schedule. And we basically coded all of this stuff, and then when we were ready to apply now. Okay, in terms of the caregiver profiles, we created 8 profiles in total. One was used per city. we went with a smaller number to keep things more logistically manageable. And the other thing I mentioned before was, I mean, just a lot of information, a lot of time and energy was required to create these things, and they all undergo reviews by the company in question. So we stuck with 8. And to those 8 profiles, we randomly assigned 5 characteristics. Number 1, the caregiver's hourly wage expectations, 3 levels. And as you can see, I mean, by default, they're stipulated in increments, in intervals. We didn't have any control over that. 3 levels of educational attainment, 5 levels of work experience. There may be a question, why do we stop at 9? You could actually indicate the individual number of years of experience between 1 and 9, and then after 9 it was 10 plus. We then signaled in 2 places on the profile whether or not the caregiver was a car owner, and then 2 levels of availability, what we're calling neutral and high availability. So neutral availability basically is no additional availability to work during the week beyond the default on the website, which is basically Monday to Friday, like normal working hours. And then high availability indicated that, as well as a willingness to work at nights and on weekends. And then, because a lot of other characteristics were required and that we weren't we were less interested in, we basically perfectly controlled or tightly controlled as much as possible for those other characteristics. So we used the same profile photo across all profiles. We established a valid email address, which itself undergoes a review. And then, as I mentioned before, we create a fictitious 5-star parent review. So here's what the top half, if you were a parent looking at our profiles, here's what the top half of the profile looks like. You see it's very generic. We purchased this off of iStock. You can see the name, the sort of descriptive information about the parent review, the experience, and the dollar range for their prices. And then the bottom half includes this information, a little bit more that I'm not showing you, but essentially each profile includes like a blurb. Basically, the same language was used across all blurbs, unless car availability, car ownership and availability were assigned, and then we kind of shoehorned this language into the profile. Here's the full text on the 5-star review. We're amazing childcare providers. The educational attainment, and then below it was more information on the experience, car ownership, and so forth. Okay, so how do we randomize these data, these characteristics to the profiles? We essentially kind of employed a 2-step randomization procedure. So in step 1, we took all of the treatments except for work experience, which provided us with 36 possible combinations, right? The 3 wage, the 3 education, 2 car, 2 availability, 36 possibilities. We randomly assigned a number from 1 to 36 to each configuration. And then in the second step, we took the 5 levels of experience and randomly assigned a level of work experience to each sequence number 1 to 36. And then data collection proceeded by sequence number. So we started with 1, we configured all 8 profiles to accord with the characteristics in sequence number 1. We went out into the field in all 8 cities at the same time, applied for about the same number of jobs in all 8 cities, waited exactly a week to hear back from parents, coded parent responses if they came in, pulled our profiles, took sequence number 2 out, adjusted the characteristics, went back into the market, and so forth. So the reason why we use this 2-step procedure is that if we treated experience in the same way we did education, we'd be left with 180 combinations. We were already in the field for over a year. We wanted to write a paper. I would not be here talking to you now. I'd still be in the field collecting data on this. And so it was really just a way to kind of hasten our data collection. We submitted one application in response to each job postings, 1,000 per city, for a total analytic sample of 8,000 job postings that we applied to. In terms of coding parent responses, it was really nice because the service that we used facilitated all communication between the caregiver and our parents. It was easy sort of checking parent responses, linking them to caregiver profiles and so forth. And so our key outcome variable is a binary indicator that equals 1 if a given caregiver received a positive parent response. And that was defined as either the parent wanted to hire the caregiver on the spot, offer the job right there, offered a job interview, seeking references, or asking some simple questions about logistics. But really, by and large, it was about a hire, offer, or an interview. That really drove the positive parent response rate. And you can see here the distribution of responses. Probably not all that surprising. The most common thing was to not hear at all from families. Our positive response rate was 25%. And in 16% of cases we actually got sort of explicitly negative responses. I mean, I could talk about what characteristics drove that. I mean, hint is prices. Prices too high, we were more likely to get explicitly negative responses. We can talk a little bit more about that later, but I'm really going to focus on the positive response rate in the analysis. Yeah.
Do you have a sense of how many, like what percentage of postings are up but not actually valid anymore? Like people who have already hired potentially and just haven't taken their posting down?
So this gets to your question before about how active. So you're wondering like how active these parents are and how many of these zeros are basically, I mean, basically noise.
Yeah, well,
Yeah.
I was thinking also about like experience of the family, maybe some sort of learning with the website. But yeah, here that's what I was.
Yeah,
to
yeah.
provide that response.
I mean, it's a question that's the problem with all of these audit studies. So, you know, in particular in like resume audit studies, I mean, you just don't have a sense of, you know, whether emails have been opened, you know, and whether those zeros are just sort of noise or true sort of lack of interest, right? And I think it's possible that the same thing is true here.
Is there any way to sort of analyze the characteristics of those non-responses and try to get at whether they seem like they wouldn't be interested?
It's good.
versus-
Yeah,
Or is there a
totally
date-
possible.
Is there a date when the posting was first posted? Do you know when the job was first posted?
We do.
Because you could look at like
Yeah.
the difference between the.
Yeah. Yeah, thanks.
I'm sorry, I may miss this, but how do you select the applications? Like which families you applied?
Yeah, I mean, so basically, I mean, if they're looking for long-term caregiving arrangements with a profile and recently posted, basically. So like posted within the last week, which I think plays to this like how actively are parents likely to be in sort of reviewing these things. But did we randomly sample postings? No.
So based on what shows up on the
Based on
website?
what shows up. Yeah.
I was just thinking, like, you use the same picture for every application, right?
Yeah.
All the profiles. How about like the racial bias? Like, if you're Hispanic or black, you may want to like hire like a black or Hispanic nanny. So you would probably reject that. So I was wondering if like if there were multiple nannies with same qualifications but just different pictures.
Yeah, so I mean, that's a whole study, and it's a good question. I will show you some evidence that may hint at own race preferences sort of playing out in the response rates in just a second. But yeah, I mean, in particular in Atlanta, which is our most racially heterogeneous city, the response rate is at the low end. Okay, so that may be an indicator that there are preferences involved. Okay, so our estimation is, is pretty straightforward because we're dealing with random assignment data. So we're running regressions of the response rate on the set of randomly assigned caregiver characteristics, controlling for the observable characteristics of the children and families that we code. We include in the model city fixed effects as well as a whole variety of time effects because our data collection periods are spanned quite a long time. And because the experimental variation really is driven at the level of the sequence number, we cluster all of our standard errors on the sequence number. Okay. Results. Okay, so here I want to start off by just showing you, how am I doing on time?
About 15, 20.
I want to start off by showing you response rates. As I mentioned before, 25% for the full sample, but look at the variation by city, right? 16% in Phoenix and 18% in Atlanta compared to 41% in Seattle. I don't have a good story to explain away Seattle, but the racial preferences story seems plausible for Atlanta being so low. Now you may say, well, sure, makes sense. It likely also hold in Phoenix because maybe there are large numbers of Hispanic families in Phoenix. Not so much. It's overwhelmingly white non-Hispanic, and so the racial preferences story doesn't seem to hold so well for Phoenix. Maybe more so for Atlanta.
Is the response rate a function of the unemployment rate in the city?
That's an interesting study in and of itself. Yeah. A good question. Yeah, and it's knowable. So before I take you through the regression results, I think it's actually useful to just walk through the descriptive, the raw response rates. And so what I'm showing you here are the response rates by wage for education and experience of the two quality components. So basically what you see is, a strong response to the hourly price of childcare. So basically for caregivers who are charging $10 to $15 an hour, they have about a 1 in 3 chance of essentially being hired, and the odds fall to about 1 in 8 for those charging $20 to $25 an hour. So parent preference is sort of strongly declining in the price of childcare, parent demand. But parents also care quite a bit about quality. So there's this sort of nice increase in the level of education of the caregiver. And although the evidence is not as strong, there is some evidence to suggest that parents are willing to reward caregivers with more experience as opposed to less. Okay, so this is totally reasonable. It accords with our expectations and indeed lots of childcare literature which suggests that parents care about quality. What about convenience? Or at least how I'm thinking about convenience here. It's sort of a slight edge given to car owners than over non-car owners, although the difference here is smaller than a one-step jump in the quality, in some of the quality results that I showed you. And interestingly, availability. Basically, parents are indifferent between those who are highly versus sort of less highly available. So what this suggests, this sort of split screen results, is that parents are actually fairly discerning, sort of think about convenience in a sophisticated way, and that not all measures of convenience maybe are thought of as being equal in the minds of parents.
Isn't it surprising that they're not preferring the people with high availability?
Are we surprised by this result? Yeah. So here's my story for what's going on here. Remember, and it may have to do with the way we designed the study. So remember that we are only looking at caregivers. We are looking at caregivers. We're interested in longer term care arrangements, not for date night. And remember, the high availability are those folks who are available at night and on weekend.
Yeah.
So so parents who are not hiring for one-off babysitter positions may be less attracted to caregivers who say that they are, or sort of indifferent with regard to caregivers who say that they're available to work over the weekend. They're not looking for care. They're not looking for that kind of care. And I think if we widen the net a little bit more, we would, to include these one-off babysitter positions, that there would be more interest in this. There'd be more differentiation. That's our story. Yeah.
How long would you say it takes parents to respond to your applications? Like, do you feel that only after 7 days you could be cutting your sample into a specific sample selection?
Yeah. Somewhere in the neighborhood of 90% of the responses that came in within the first 3 days. So parents were like on top of this. Yeah. But your question is fair. Yeah.
And then by design, you stopped it by 1 week.
Yeah. Yeah. By design. Yeah.
Yeah, do you think that's because of you selecting families who just applied within a week? That's why the response rate is high?
It may be. Yeah. Right. You talk about sort of the recency of the job postings. Yeah.
I was wondering if maybe the availability was sort of placed, where it was placed in the profile, if it was possible that people weren't seeing it. And then also if in the posting the parents put up, if they state what they would like in terms of availability, because maybe they think if you're applying, you've already seen what's required.
Your point about whether parents' eyes are seeing it, are coming across it as a concern. So we did our best to sort of get around that by signaling in two different parts of the profile, both the availability piece and the car ownership piece. And it may just be that the availability, there isn't a big enough contrast. If we had to do this again, I would redo the availability
Like a restricted
over,
instead of neutral.
Yeah, I think that's our weakest treatment in terms of sort of the contrast between levels. And it may be driven by the fact that we're applying to parents who are less concerned about childcare on the weekends, which may be creeping up in our sample selection criteria. So I'm the least happy about the availability treatment, to be honest with you. But we did our best to make it very sort of present to parents. Okay, so here are the regression-based results. First for wages, so the omitted category are childcare providers charging $10 to $15 an hour. So those charging 15 to 20 are 7.6 percentage points less likely to get a positive parent response. And from the mean of about 25%, this implies about a 31% reduction in the likelihood of receiving a positive response.
So that's an elasticity, right, of about 0.7, 0.8. How is that relative to what I know whether how good the non-experimental evidence has been? How does it compare?
So Erdal and I have gone back and forth about whether we can estimate an elasticity. And we have 3 levels of wages. We'll play around with the estimates in a second, but I don't know. If you have, it's not clear. I'd love to be able to calculate an elasticity here, but it's tricky given the given the data. When prices go up to $20 to $25 an hour, you see an 83% reduction in response rates. So again, more evidence that parent preferences are severely sensitive to the cost of childcare.
I know you're controlling for the other characteristics, but you thought about interactions, because I was thinking about with your randomization, there's a lot of cases that they're really good deals, right? So they're only charging $10 to $15, but they have a college education, they have 9 years of experience, and they're available all the time, right? So I'm wondering how these all kind of combine together.
Yeah, I'm going to show you some evidence on that. I think exactly that point, and it's interesting. Yeah, we do that. consistent with the descriptive results. Although you'll see, at least for BAs, the implied effect here, even though it's the strongest effect for education, is smaller than it is for prices. So if we're in a horse race, prices seem to be sort of what's driving decisions. Work experience, the omitted category is 1 year. So obviously, all parents are willing to reward those with more education, but the relationship here is interesting, right? It's reverse U-shaped. So there's this little falling off at 9 years.
Could be an age factor. It could be that the women who apply with 9 years of experience are older, and that you're mixing the effect of experience and age. Because if they, if you're looking for somebody to take care of a little baby, you don't want somebody old who would have a hard time lifting the baby and stuff.
We are holding constant the age of the caregiver.
Oh, that's right.
In the study.
But
So this
9
is
years
pure-
of experience for a 30-year-old.
Yeah.
I think the profile picture is old, although I don't imagine they'd take it for a 60-year-old or something.
Yeah. I was going to give parents some credit. I usually don't give parents a lot of credit, but what this suggests to me is that maybe parents have in their mind like a model of decreasing returns to work experience, like they have a production function, quality production function in their mind, and 9 years just, is just, is not that they don't like it, but it may not be needed.
Or maybe
Well,
they think it's something.
I think maybe there's a possibility that they see they had 9 years of experience, but only one review.
That's a good point.
I think that they're paying for those extra years of experience, like you said, so then it decreases what they're willing to pay for this.
There definitely, I'm not going to show you these results, but there definitely is, yes, your point is well taken that there is, just parents don't see the value in 9 years of experience, basically. Okay, here are the two results on availability or convenience, basically the same as the descriptive results. Okay, so here's some evidence, and this is, I think, quite interesting. Here's some evidence on sort of heterogeneous effects of these characteristics, whether parent preferences are stable across families. And here we look at white and non-white parents. So basically what I'm showing here is not the raw response rate, but the regression coefficients. And anytime you see an NS hovering nearby 2 bars, that means the two coefficients are not statistically significant. If there's a star, it means that they are statistically significant at the 90% level or better. So what's interesting is that white and non-white parents are about equally sensitive to the cost of childcare, about equally cranky about having to pay more. But look at the differences with regard to quality. So white parents seem to have much stronger preferences for education and experience, and particularly at the very high level of caregiver education. What's interesting here is not just that there are differences between white and non-white parents, but look at the coefficients for non-white parents. They're basically 0, okay, for many of the characteristics. Okay.
It could be a matter of preference for matching between the parent and the caretaker. There are very few of these parents, the black parents might be college educated themselves, so it doesn't seem important to them to find a college educated caregiver, and there may be also a real gap between what they earn and they figure, I can't afford a college educated caretaker when all I'm doing is getting a blue collar job.
Good point. Fair point.
On the applicant or on the profiles, so if you say they have an associate's or a bachelor, it says what school it's from, right?
Yeah.
So how did you choose that? Was it just like, oh, they is such and such in the area, or?
Yeah, usually it was the flagship university in the state, except for DC. It was University of Maryland College Park.
I'm just thinking. I'm
just gonna hold just because we don't have a ton of time left, so I want to make sure we get to sort of any final things
Okay.
you want to get to next.
Okay.
And then we can definitely chat for a while after.
Okay. We'll talk. Okay. Here's a second cut of the data by this kind of parent revealing the maximum dollar amount that they're willing to pay or capable of paying the child care provider. And we basically cut it at the sample median. So below 20 are the low willingness to pay, above 20 the high willingness to pay. So what's interesting here with regard to prices, it's not surprising that parents who are willing to pay, say they're willing to pay caregivers more, or actually are less sensitive to prices than low willingness to pay parents. But the differences don't stop there. These high ability to pay parents have stronger preferences for quality, stronger preferences for education and experience. So this sort of begs the question, is this variable really capturing willingness to pay or ability to pay? In other words, is this sort of tapping into the sort of socioeconomic status of the family? These results sort of seem consistent with a sort of an income story, a socioeconomic status story, rather than sort of a preferences or willingness to pay story. Okay. What we do here basically is try to get a fix on the relative magnitude of the effect of convenience versus quality. And so basically what we do is we ask how much would parents have to be, and we use the regression coefficients for this, how much would parents have to be paid to give up caregiver with higher levels of education to take on one with lower levels, and to give up a caregiver with a car who owns a car to take on one that does not own a car. And so basically what we do is we calculate the extra cost per week for families, moving from one wage category to another for a caregiver, multiplied by essentially the ratio of a given characteristic, either education or car ownership, to the effect of prices itself. And so what we find is for the full sample, to convince parents to give up a BA degree teacher and take on one with a high school degree, they have to be paid $90 a week. To move from a car owning to a non-car owning parent, they have to be paid $36 a week. So, I mean, without pushing this too far, I mean, our conclusion is that parents care about quality more so than convenience, is at least the way we measure it, at about sort of a rate of $3 to 1. Another way to kind of benchmark these dollar amounts is to compare it to what parents are actually paying for home-based childcare each week. So the median out-of-pocket cost for home-based care is about $108. So one way to sort of think about this this $90 is 83% of 108. So in a sense, in order to hire a less skilled caregiver, parents would have to be refunded about 83% of their weekly childcare expenditures to make this move. They'd have to be refunded about 33% for car owners. We do the same thing for white and non-white parents. I'll sort of skip that. Take a look at the white non-white comparison. It's quite interesting. Okay, the last set of results really try to tap into more explicitly this willingness to pay. First, for quality as measured by caregiver education. And so basically what we do is we calculate the raw response rate by wage, by caregiver education. And so what's sort of interesting here is if you're a parent and you're trying to decide between a high school diploma caregiver and an AA degree caregiver, and the caregiver is charging $10 to $15 an hour, sort of a low hourly rate. Our parents are telling us that they like the AA degree much more so than the high school diploma. And I think that makes a lot of sense. But what if the caregiver sort of kicks up their price? It charges $20 to $25 an hour. I mean, what's incredible is the response rate declines dramatically. Okay? What that suggests to me is that at least within that end, within that sort of the lower end of the skill distribution, there may not be willingness to pay. But look at the move from an AA degree to a BA degree. So again, if the caregiver is going to charge a low amount, you're going to want more of the BA. But you're going to want more of the BA at about twice the rate at high child care prices. So this suggests to me, again, or in conversely, some willingness to pay at the high end of the skill distribution. Okay. For car ownership, I do the same thing. There's, essentially kind of willingness to pay throughout the pay scale, except for the lowest amount. So this suggests, at least with regard to convenience, there is willingness to pay, but it's not as large as the gradient isn't as large as it is for education. Finally, for availability, the story is just the opposite. Parents actually penalize high charging, highly available caregivers relative to caregivers who charge a lot who are not highly available. Whereas they seem more willingness to reward caregivers at the low end of the pay scale. Okay. I mean, there are 2 more slides, but that I'm going to tell you again what I've already told you, and here are the policy implications.
No, that's great. Thank you very much. So if you have more questions, you want to interact with us here for a little while longer. Next week we have colleagues. Now, pronounce Dr. Lee's first name. I don't want to blow it. Xiaoshui. Lee from the University of New Mexico will be here also to present. It's almost as if these papers are nice sort of back-to-back papers. She's going to be presenting some work on quality assurance at VA hospitals and looking at the impacts of laws dealing with quality disclosure. So it'll be a nice bookend to sort of this paper. So I look forward to seeing you next week.